phone was already ringing when Lena Calloway walked through her front door, her shoes in one hand and her keys in the other, and she knew before she even looked at the screen that it was Mara. Mara was the only person in her life who called instead of texting. She was also the only person who had a specific instinct for exactly when Lena was crossing a threshold, which Lena had long given up trying to explain scientifically, and had simply accepted as one of the more inexplicable facts of an 11-year friendship. "Do not say no," Mara announced, before Lena had finished saying hello. "I haven't said anything yet. You were about to. I could feel it from across the city." Lena dropped her keys on the counter and sat down on the edge of the sofa. She had been at the bakery since 5 in the morning. Her feet ached in the particular way that happened when you spent 12 hours moving between cold tile floors and hot oven fronts. Her hair still carried the faint smell of cinnamon and browned butter, which was not a bad thing to smell like at the end of a day, but was still a clear sign that she had been there longer than she had planned. "What is it?" she asked. "The Crown and Claw," Mara said. "Tonight, 8 o'clock. It's your birthday." "I know it's my birthday. I've been aware of that since I woke up." "You know what you're wearing too. That blue thing your mother sent. It has been hanging in your wardrobe for 2 full years, collecting absolutely nothing." 1 year. 2. I helped you carry the box it came in when you moved, and that was 2 years ago in October, and that outfit has not seen the outside of your wardrobe since the day you unpacked it. Tonight is the night, Lena." Lena looked across the apartment at the wardrobe door, which was slightly open, and she could see the edge of the blue outfit visible in the gap, hanging exactly as she had hung it, neatly and without wrinkles, because it was a nice thing, and she treated nice things carefully. Her mother had sent it from a trip overseas, with a handwritten note tucked into the sleeve. "You deserve to go somewhere that requires this." Lena had smiled at the note and set it aside, and fully intended to find the somewhere. She just had not gotten around to locating the right occasion yet. She considered the outfit for a moment. "Fine," she said. Mara made a sound that was pure, uncontained satisfaction. "I'll meet you there at 8. Don't be late. We're not staying past midnight." "Absolutely," Mara said, in a tone that meant nothing of the sort, and hung up before Lena could press the matter. She showered and changed, and spent longer than usual in front of the mirror, which was unusual for her, because she was not in the habit of taking long at mirrors. She put her hair up because it was practical, and then she considered it and left it that way, because Mara would say it was perfect, and that would make the whole thing slightly easier. She was in a taxi by 7:45. The Crown and Claw occupied a corner in the newer part of the city, in a building with clean edges and tall windows, through which warm amber light spilled onto the pavement outside. It was the kind of place Lena had noticed many times while passing and never entered, the kind that looked expensive, in a way that was more about the specific quality of its quiet than anything that could be itemized. There was a doorman who opened the door with a nod that was welcoming and careful at the same time. Mara was already there, naturally, sitting at the bar with a glass in hand and a look of mild triumph at having arrived first, which she treated as a victory any time it happened. "You look wonderful," she said, with genuine feeling, before Lena had even sat down. "It's the outfit," Lena said. "It's you in the outfit," Mara corrected. "There is a difference." They found 2 stools and ordered cocktails with names printed in italic font on cream-colored cards. Lena read hers twice, before ordering, because she was not in the habit of asking for things she could not pronounce. The drinks arrived in heavy glasses with specific garnishes that someone had clearly put thought into, and Lena drank hers slowly, because it was strong, and because she did not want the evening to blur. The bar filled around them in the particular way that Friday nights filled places in this city. It was a specific kind of energy, warm and slightly electric, the particular lightness of people who had finished their weeks and were consciously setting them down. Conversations rose and fell. Someone laughed loudly from a corner table, and nobody looked, because loud laughter was allowed here. Lena let herself settle into it, let the tension from the week loosen the way it loosened when the setting was right. They talked the way they always talked, without agenda, without the need to organize what they said before they said it. Mara was in the middle of a story about a client at her office who had changed the scope of a project after it had already been completed, and then sent a very pleasant email about it, as though pleasantness and fairness were interchangeable. Lena was telling her about the cardamom honey tart she had been testing for 2 weeks now, and still could not get quite right. the filling sitting a fraction too heavy for what she wanted, the honey flavor arriving late instead of first. Add the honey in 2 stages, Mara said, because Mara had no formal culinary training and boundless opinions about food. That's not how it works. How do you know if you haven't tried it? Because I understand what honey does to a custard base when you introduce it at different temperatures. And what does it do? Things you don't want it to do, Lena said, and Mara laughed, and the second round arrived. It was somewhere between the second and third round that Lena noticed the man at the far end of the bar. He was not doing anything to draw attention to himself, which was precisely what caught hers. In a room where everyone was, consciously or not, performing slightly, tilting toward the people who were watching, adjusting their expressions when interesting things happened nearby, this man was doing none of it. He was entirely still. His posture was straight, without being rigid. His hands rested around a glass of something dark without gripping it. His eyes were directed at the bottles arranged on the shelves behind the bar, but he had the look of someone who was not really seeing what was in front of him, who was thinking something miles and years away from this particular room. The seat beside him was empty. In a bar this full on a Friday, an empty seat next to a single person was unusual. People did not leave space when there was no space to leave. And yet, the 3 people nearest him were each positioned at a slight remove, as though the area around him had a natural boundary that everyone respected, without having been told to. She noticed this once and filed it away. She looked twice more before Mara spoke. "You keep looking at the same spot," Mara said, without turning around, because Mara had always had the particular skill of seeing things while appearing to look elsewhere. "Go over. I'm people watching. It's a general activity. You've done it very specifically, 4 times in one direction." She turned now, briefly, and then back. "Go say something ridiculous. Make it so obviously a joke that there's no way to misread it. It's your birthday, Lena. You're allowed one completely absurd moment." The third cocktail was stronger than the first 2, or Lena had drunk it faster than she realized. Either way, the warmth of it had spread in a way that made things feel both brighter and more manageable. The distance between here and the end of the bar seemed shorter than it had a few minutes ago. The potential for awkwardness seemed smaller. She set the glass down with a quiet click. She stood up. She straightened the blue outfit her mother had sent, with a note that said, "You deserve to go somewhere that requires this." "Don't," Mara said, which was not really a don't, and they both understood that perfectly. Lena walked the length of the bar. She noticed, as she got closer, that the invisible distance around this man was more pronounced from the inside of it. Nobody's elbow was in his space. Nobody's shoulder had drifted toward him in the natural way shoulders drifted in crowded places. A large man in a dark jacket was sitting 4 stools back, not doing anything, not looking at anything specific, but placed with a precision that she registered in some back compartment of her awareness, and set aside. She reached the empty stool. She put one hand flat on the bar, the way she did when she was standing at a counter and about to address something. The man had not looked at her yet, or if he had, the moment was so brief she had missed it. She said, without giving herself the pause in which she would talk herself out of it, "You look lonely. Want to get married?" She said it lightly. She meant it to be obvious, the joke so transparent that the only thing to do with it was laugh and move on. He turned and looked at her. His eyes were amber. Not the warm brown that people sometimes described as amber. Real amber. The kind that was its own color entirely, that held light inside it and returned it differently. They were very still, those eyes, and they looked at her with a completeness of attention that she was not prepared for, the focus of something that had become extremely skilled at looking at things and understanding what it found. He looked at her for 2 full seconds without speaking. Then, in a voice that was low and unhurried, and absolutely without doubt, he said one word. "Agreed." She waited. She was certain, she was completely certain, that what came next was the laugh, the easy smile, the signal that he was in on it with her. What came next was nothing. He simply continued to look at her, and the words sat between them in the air, and around them, the nearby conversations had gone quiet, in a way that spread slowly outward, like something dropped in still water. "That was a joke," she said. "I know," he said. "So you're joking too," she said. "Obviously." "Right." He said nothing. He did not confirm it. He did not deny it. He looked at her with those amber eyes, and the silence that followed was not the silence of discomfort. It was the silence of a man who had nothing to take back and was not going to pretend otherwise. Lena became aware of the room. More people were watching than she had realized. She could feel it before she turned to check it. Some of them wore the particular expression of people witnessing something that they could not intervene in. The large man in the dark jacket had moved slightly. Two other men she had not noticed at all before had appeared at the edges of her peripheral vision, positioned with that same deliberate quality. "Who are you?" she asked, because the room was behaving like she had done something that mattered, and she needed to understand why. He did not make an event of it. He said it the way you said a fact. Darian Voss. The name arrived in the air, and did something to it. Lena did not move. She kept her expression in the pleasant, attentive arrangement she had learned to hold in situations she was still processing, because she was very good at appearing steady, while the interior of her mind did something much more energetic. And what the interior of her mind was doing right now was rapidly and rather urgently retrieving every piece of information it had ever filed under that name. Darian Voss, Alpha King of the Northern Territories. She knew the name the way she knew the name of the mountain range that formed the northern skyline of this city, as a permanent and unquestioned fact of the landscape she lived in. She knew he was young for the title, that he had taken it at 24 after his father's death, that the communities under his governance spanned a vast stretch of northern land and operated under their own laws alongside the ones she lived by. She knew, in the vague way you knew things about powerful people who occupied a completely different layer of the world from your own, that he was considered formidable, and that people spoke of him with the specific care of those who understood that the person they were discussing could hear them even when he appeared not to be listening. She had never seen a clear photograph of his face. Now she understood why he did not take them. "Oh," she said. It was all she had, and it was very small, and it did not come close to covering the ground it needed to cover. He tilted his head just slightly, and for the very first time, something moved in his expression that was not quite amusement, but was the nearest thing to it she had seen from him. "Do you want to sit down, or would you prefer to stand?" Lena sat down. She sat there for 4 more hours. She would remember the evening afterward in the way she remembered things that mattered, not in order, not completely, but in vivid and specific flashes that refused to fade the way ordinary nights faded. She remembered that he listened in a way that most people did not, without the underlying current of waiting for his turn, without the small signals that told you a person's attention was already preparing its response while you were still speaking. She remembered telling him about her grandmother's recipe box, and him asking what it was about her grandmother's recipes that made them different, and her own answer surprising her with how long it ran, because it was a question no one had ever put to her in quite that form before. She remembered, vaguely, shaking his hand on something, though the specific shape of the agreement had blurred by that point in the evening, and she had told herself it was part of the bit, and nothing with real consequence. She remembered asking a guard whether her parking could be validated, and the specific expression the guard had produced in response, an expression she would understand much better when she thought about it later. She remembered, with complete and undiminished clarity, the single word. Agreed. She went home in a taxi. She sat on the edge of her bed and took her shoes off and set them neatly by the door. She explained to herself, in the organized way she explained things to herself when she wanted them to stay organized, that the evening had been a remarkable accident, that the word had been theater, from a man who understood how to hold a room, and that by the morning, it would have rearranged itself into a good birthday story and nothing else. She believed this completely, and fell asleep believing it. The knock on her door at 9:17 the next morning was the first indication, clear and unmistakable, that she had been entirely wrong. The knock was not a friendly knock. It was not the quick, cheerful tap of someone delivering something, and it was not the light double knock of a neighbor borrowing something. It was 3 beats, measured and deliberate, placed with the precision of someone who had done this before, and knew that 3 beats was exactly enough. Not aggressive, not urgent, simply certain. Lena heard it from underneath her pillow, where her head was currently located. She lay still and waited to see if it would stop. It did not stop. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats again. The same interval. The same wait. The knock of someone who had nowhere else to be, and would continue at identical intervals, until someone answered. She pulled herself up from the bed, found her slippers on the second try, and crossed the apartment in a state of partial consciousness. Her hair was in no particular arrangement. Her eyes were doing their best in inadequate lighting. She had gone to sleep later than intended, because the evening had stayed with her in a way she had not anticipated, replaying in pieces the amber eyes, and the stillness, and the word, and she had spent longer than was reasonable, telling herself to stop thinking about it, before she finally managed to stop. She opened the door. Mara was standing in the hallway holding 2 paper cups of coffee, and wearing an expression that Lena had never seen on her before, which was a meaningful thing, because she had seen Mara in a comprehensive range of situations over 11 years of friendship. It was the expression of someone who had been awake for a long time processing information, and had arrived, through sheer force of effort, at a level of calm that was entirely constructed, sitting on top of something much less calm underneath. "Come in," Lena said, stepping back. Mara came in. She set the 2 coffees on the small kitchen table, and sat down across from it, and folded her hands in front of her, and looked at Lena, with the specific expression of someone who has rehearsed how they are going to say something, and is now making sure the other person is awake enough to receive it. "That bad," Lena said. It was not a question. "You don't remember the second half of the evening," Mara said. It was also not a question. Lena wrapped both hands around the nearest cup. "I remember pieces." "Do you remember shaking his hand?" Lena thought. There was something there, a flash of it, the specific firmness of a grip, the sense of something being concluded, vaguely. "Do you remember what you were shaking on?" She thought harder. She could feel the edges of the memory without being able to bring the center of it into focus. "Something about, I think I said something about a deal being a deal." She paused. "Was I being funny?" "You were being very confident," Mara said carefully. "You told him that if he was going to say agreed to a birthday joke, then he had to be willing to follow through, and then you shook his hand on it, and then—" She stopped. "And then?" "One of the men in the dark jackets went and got something, and you signed it." The room was very quiet for a moment. "I signed something," Lena said. "A document. It had a seal on it. Dark ink, embossed, very formal looking. I tried to get your attention, but you were mid-sentence, and you told me, and I am quoting you directly here, to let you have your moment." Mara looked at her with the expression of someone delivering a verdict they did not enjoy. "You seemed very pleased about it at the time." Lena set the coffee down and pressed both palms flat on the table and looked at them, the way you looked at familiar things when you needed something solid to anchor you. "It's not binding," she said. "Whatever it says. I was not in a state to sign anything legally meaningful. It's a bar document." "It's nothing." "Right," said Mara. "I thought that too." "But," Lena said. "But I may have done some reading this morning," Mara said. "After I woke up and could not fall back asleep, because the image of you signing a royal document at midnight was very present in my mind." She pulled out her phone, looked at it, and set it face down, which meant she had found things she was not sure how to present. The ancient binding accord is a real thing. It has been in operation under Northern Pack law for several hundred years, and Northern Pack law is recognized by the regional government as a parallel legal framework, which means, Lena said, which means it exists in a category that regular civil procedure does not automatically override. The knock came then. Not her front door directly, but the building intercom first, and then the inner door, and the knock that followed had the same measured quality as the one she had woken to. 3 beats, deliberate, not going anywhere. Mara and Lena looked at each other across the table. Lena stood, crossed the apartment, and opened the door. The woman on the other side was tall, dressed in a perfectly pressed gray suit of the kind that communicated nothing about fashion and everything about function. Her hair was dark and arranged neatly. She was perhaps 45, and carried herself with the particular economy of someone who had never once in her life run for a train, because she had never allowed herself to be in a position where running was necessary. "Lena Calloway," she said. "Yes," Lena said. "I am Chancellor Neva. I serve the Northern Territories Court under King Darian Voss." She produced a folder from the slim bag she carried and held it out with both hands. "I am here at the king's request." Lena looked at the folder. She looked at the woman. She looked at the folder again, at the dark stamp visible through the semi-transparent cover page. "I was joking," she said. "I understand," said Chancellor Neva. She said it without any edge, without impatience, in the tone of someone who had been specifically briefed on this response and had prepared for it. However, the king does not interpret the events of last evening as a joke. Under the provisions of the ancient binding accord, a verbal agreement made before witnesses and sealed with a physical confirmation, in this case a handshake and a countersigned document, constitutes a valid declaration of intent under the laws of the Northern Territories. I was 3 cocktails into my birthday evening, Lena said. The accord was written in a period when many binding agreements were reached during shared celebrations that involved significant drink. Sobriety is not listed as a condition of validity. Neva paused, briefly. The document you signed is legally consistent with the accord's requirements. I have a copy for your review if you would like. From the kitchen, Mara said, very quietly, "Oh no." Lena took the folder. She sat down with it, at the small table next to her, untouched coffee, and opened it. Inside was the document, and at the top was a royal seal of the kind that looked like it carried the weight of several centuries behind it. Dark ink pressed into the heavy paper with a depth that meant something. She read it the way she read recipes, not decoratively, not skimming, but looking for the essential information underneath the formal language. The essential information was clear. Her handwriting was at the bottom of the 3rd page. She recognized it immediately. It was slightly less careful than her usual hand, which told her everything she needed to know about the precise condition of her fine motor control at the time of signing. She closed the folder. She looked up at Chancellor Neva, who had not shifted, had not checked anything, had not given any indication that she experienced time passing in a way that required management. "What happens if I decline to engage with this?" Lena said. "The accord's breach provisions are outlined in the annex," Neva said. "They begin on page 4. They are significant." She paused, and for the first time, something almost human moved in her expression. Not warmth exactly, but its functional cousin. "However, the king is not here to impose anything by force. He is requesting a meeting. He considers that the reasonable first step before any other action is considered. He wants to talk," Lena said. "He expects you at the estate this evening at 6 o'clock. I will return at 5:30 to escort you, should you choose to come. And if I don't choose to come, his legal team will be in contact with yours." A pause. "I would recommend coming, Miss Calloway." Neva left the folder on the table, confirmed she would return at 5:30, and walked back down the hallway with the quiet certainty of someone who had delivered difficult information before and had made peace with the fact that it was sometimes an unpleasant job. Lena closed the front door. She stood with her back against it and looked across the apartment at Mara, who was holding her coffee cup in both hands and looking back at her with an expression that was divided, in roughly equal parts, between deep concern and the kind of fascinated alertness that some people could not fully suppress, even in genuinely serious situations. "He wants to meet," Lena said. "I heard," Mara said. "To discuss a birthday joke I apparently signed legal documents about. That does seem to be the situation." A silence. "I'm coming with you," Mara said. "You are not." "Lena." "Mara. You are not going to an estate you have never seen, alone, in response to a sealed document you signed at midnight on your birthday. That is not a situation any reasonable person navigates without backup." She set her cup down with the small, definitive sound of a decision being made. "I will sit in the car. I will not come in unless you need me. But I am going." Lena looked at her for a moment. "You wait in the car," she said. "Of course," Mara said. "Absolutely." Lena called her friend George at noon. George had studied law for 3 years, before deciding he preferred the reality of paralegal work to the theory of practice, and he was the most legally knowledgeable person she knew, with a phone number she had memorized. She read him the key sections of the accord over the phone. He was quiet for considerably longer than she would have liked. "Where did you get this?" he said. "A woman in a gray suit brought it to my door this morning." "Lena, is it real?" Another long pause. "The ancient binding accord is a genuine historical document that has been in continuous use under Northern Pack law for centuries. Pack law operates as a recognized parallel legal system in this region, which means..." He stopped. "Which means a document executed under its provisions is not automatically invalidated by an argument of, for example, impaired judgment at the time of signing. because pack law applies different standards. I signed it at midnight at a bar on my birthday, she said. I understand that, and I think the best course of action is to go to the meeting, because they almost certainly have provisions for releasing parties from accords by mutual agreement, and mutual agreement is going to be easier to reach in a direct conversation than through legal letters. He paused. I would go, Lena, and I would go prepared to be reasonable, because in my understanding, these people respond well to that. She thanked him. She hung up. She sat at the window and looked at the ordinary Friday afternoon happening on the street below. People walking past with shopping and pushing children in prams and doing the unremarkable things people did on unremarkable Friday afternoons, entirely unaware that one of them had accidentally triggered a legal process that predated the city they were walking through. She spent the afternoon doing the things she needed to do, calling Oliver at the bakery to ask him to manage things for the weekend, eating a sandwich she did not particularly taste, and reading the Accord Annex on page 4, which confirmed George's assessment that the consequences of breach were not something she wanted to test. At 5:30 exactly, Chancellor Neva knocked. The drive north was long and quiet. Mara sat beside her in the back seat, silent for once, doing the particular thing she did when silence was what the moment required, which was a gift Lena had always appreciated. The city fell away behind them. The road wound through trees that grew taller as they moved north, the light changing quality as they went, becoming something older and more deliberate. The estate appeared first as lights through the trees. Many lights, arranged with the settled certainty of something that had been in that place for a very long time and did not intend to go anywhere. Lena looked at it through the window. She had come here to clear up a misunderstanding. She had a speech ready, and it was a good speech, and she believed in it. She was about to walk into a conversation that would change the shape of her entire life, and she did not know that yet, but she would know it before she walked back out again. The estate did not announce itself the way Lena had half expected. She had imagined something that performed its own power more obviously, gates with uniformed guards who cross-checked names against clipboards, a driveway lined with something impressive on either side, an entrance designed to communicate who lived here, before you ever got close enough to knock. There was some of that. The gates existed, and the men at them were attentive and deliberate, and the driveway was long and curved through land that was manicured without being decorative. But the building at the end of it did not reach for you. It simply stood, large in the way that things were large when they had been built for permanence rather than impression. Dark stone walls that had the weathered quality of something that had watched many seasons pass and found none of them particularly remarkable. Chancellor Neva led her through the entrance and into the main hall, and Lena did what she always did in new spaces. She looked at everything without letting her face show how carefully she was looking. She had developed this habit in professional kitchens, where the first 30 seconds in a new space told you more about how things ran there than any briefing could. She applied it here. The floors were dark-stained wood, wide-planked and old. The ceilings were high enough that the sounds they carried came back differently, a lower register, the particular acoustic of spaces that had not been designed to feel cozy. The lights were warm rather than bright. There was no unnecessary furniture, no decorative effort for its own sake. Everything in the room had a reason for being in the room, and the things that did not have a reason had not been allowed in. This was a house that had been lived in seriously. She followed Neva through a long corridor, took 2 turns she catalogued automatically, and stopped at a set of double doors on the right side of a wide hallway where the light was particularly good. Neva knocked once, waited for a sound from inside, and opened one door and stepped back. Lena went through. The study was large, with windows across the far wall that brought in the last of the afternoon light and made the room bright in a way that left nowhere to hide. Bookshelves covered 2 walls from the floor to the high ceiling. There was a wide desk positioned toward the center right of the room, and beside it, not behind it, standing with his arms at his sides, was Darian Voss. He was different in afternoon light from the man she had seen in the bar. At the bar, the low amber lighting had broken him into parts, the stillness, the eyes, the voice. In this room, in full natural light, he was complete, and more difficult to organize into a manageable impression. He was taller than she had registered, or perhaps the room made him seem that way. He was dressed in dark trousers, and a dark shirt, with the sleeves partially rolled, which was not what she had expected. She had half expected something more formal, more performed, a visual argument for the weight of his position. He wore none of that. He was reading a document when she entered. He set it aside on the desk without completing what he was doing, which told her something. He looked at her the same way he had looked at her at the bar, directly and fully, and without the social layer that most people applied to first impressions. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I wasn't certain I had much choice about it," she said. "You had more than the document suggested," he said. "I want to be clear about that. Will you sit?" He gestured toward chairs near the window, and she noticed that he chose a chair at an angle to hers, rather than placing himself behind the desk. She noticed this, and did not remark on it, and filed it as information. She had spent the drive preparing what she needed to say, and she said it now, clearly and without rushing, that the evening had been her birthday, that she had been drinking more than was usual for her, that the proposal had been a joke, with no sincere intent behind it, and that she had a substantial amount of evidence on her side if sincerity was the legal bar. That the handshake had been part of continuing the bit, and that whatever she had signed she would never have signed in a sober and considered state, and that she was asking him, respectfully and without drama, to release her from the accord's requirements on the grounds that no genuine agreement had been reached, because you could not genuinely agree to something you were not genuinely asking. She finished. He had not interrupted. He had listened with his full attention, which she already understood was his mode of operating, and when she stopped, he did not speak immediately. He looked at the window for a moment, and in the light she could see his face very clearly. The angles of it, the controlled quality of it, the particular stillness of someone who had learned to manage what his expression showed him feeling, rather than suppressing the feeling itself. Then he looked back at her. "You called the joke before I did," he said. She blinked. "What do you mean?" 6 years, he said. He turned slightly in the chair, not restlessly, just orienting himself toward what he was saying. "My counsel has spent 6 years identifying candidates for this position. Potential partners. Every one of them has been selected because they represent something useful, an alliance, a territorial agreement, a political advantage of some kind. Every meeting I've had with any of them has been organized in advance. Everyone in those conversations knows exactly what they want from the outcome. Everyone has an agenda they're managing." He paused and looked at her directly. "You walked across a room in a bar and asked me if I wanted to get married, as though you were asking if I wanted someone to pass the salt. You did not know who I was. You were not managing anything. You had nothing to gain from my answer either way." Lena held his gaze. She was doing the thing she did with people when she was still forming her understanding of them, the careful reading, looking for the space between what they said and what they meant. She was not finding a gap. "That's not a reason to hold a stranger to a centuries-old legal document," she said. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He leaned back slightly and folded his hands, not defensively, just settling. "Which is why I'm not doing that. The accord can be voided. I can have the documentation prepared today. You sign nothing and leave under no obligation, and we do not need to speak about this again." She waited. "But," she said, "but I'd like to offer you something different instead." He looked at her steadily. 30 days. You stay at the estate, on your own terms, with full freedom to move and communicate and continue your work. At the end of 30 days, you make a choice about whether to leave or to stay, and whatever you choose, I accept it without legal interference. Lena looked at him. "You want me to audition for your life," she said. "I want you to have enough information to make a real decision," he said. "Not a joke, not a midnight signature, not a hasty refusal in a room full of legal documents the morning after." He paused. "A real one, based on knowing what this world actually is. And if I walk away at the end of 30 days, then you walk away free of any obligation. I void the accord and return to my counsel's process, and you go back to your bakery and your life, and we are done." He was very direct about it, which she appreciated more than she expected to. "And if I stay, then we discuss what that looks like," he said, "on whatever terms you bring to that conversation." Lena was quiet. She looked at the room, at the shelves and the books on them and the afternoon light coming through the tall windows and lying across the floor. She thought about what she knew about this man, which was almost nothing. She thought about what she had felt in the bar, which was something she was still not entirely willing to name. She thought about the way he had said agreed, about the fact that he had said nothing since that suggested he was performing, about the way he had been standing rather than sitting when she walked in, as though he had been doing something that did not involve waiting for her, but that he had stopped when she arrived. "I need some conditions," she said. "Tell me what they are. I keep my bakery running. My staff needs to hear from me regularly. Of course. I communicate freely. My own phone, my own contacts, no restrictions." "There are no restrictions. And nobody here tries to tell me how to present myself or what to say in any setting." He held her gaze. "I would not want them to." She held his gaze in return, doing her final assessment. There was a quality she was looking for, that she had learned to look for over years of dealing with people, the small inconsistency between expression and intention that appeared when someone was saying something they did not entirely mean. She looked for it in him and did not find it. 30 days, she said. 30 days, he confirmed. She stood up. He rose when she rose, which was so natural and immediate that it was clearly not something he had decided to do. It was simply what he did. She filed this also. "I'll go back tonight and arrange things," she said. "I'll return tomorrow morning." He nodded. She was at the door when she stopped, because there was one question that had been underneath all the others since the night before, and that she had not asked yet, and she wanted the answer now, when he was not expecting it. "Why did you say it?" she said, without turning. "The very first moment, before any of this, before I even told you my name, when you had no context, and every reason to say nothing. Why agreed?" The room was quiet behind her. When he spoke, his voice was level, the way it was when he was being most honest. She was beginning to understand. "Because you looked at me and saw a lonely man sitting at the end of a bar. Not a king, not a title, not a problem to be managed, or an opportunity to be considered. Just a person." A pause that was not dramatic but felt necessary. "I have not been looked at like that in a very long time. It made me want to see what would happen if I answered honestly." Lena stood at the door for a moment. She did not turn around. "I'll be here at 9, she said, and walked out into the corridor where Neva was waiting, and she kept her face arranged in the neutral expression she had been wearing all afternoon, and she held it all the way to the car where Mara was sitting, with both hands in her lap, and an expression of barely managed anticipation. Lena got in. The door closed. The car began to move. "Well?" Mara said. 30 days, Lena said. Mara was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. "Are you going?" Lena watched the estate lights recede in the side mirror. "Yes," she said. "I think I am." And she looked forward through the windscreen at the road ahead, and said nothing more for the whole drive home, because she was already thinking about what 30 days in that world might teach her, and the thought was both the most unsettling and the most interesting thing she had held in her mind for a very long time. She arrived at 9 the next morning, as promised, with one bag packed for 30 days that she had assembled the night before, with the practical efficiency she brought to everything she prepared, nothing unnecessary and nothing missing. Mara had driven her, because Mara had determined at some point between Lena saying yes and Lena waking up, that the concept of waiting in the car had always been a preliminary position in an ongoing negotiation, rather than a concluded agreement, and had revised her stance overnight to include accompanying Lena all the way to the entrance. Lena had accepted this without using energy she didn't have to argue it. "Call me tonight," Mara said, on the step. "I'll call tonight. And if anything feels wrong, I'll leave. I know. 30 days, Mara, not 30 years. Go home." She went in. Chancellor Neva was waiting in the main hall with the prepared efficiency of someone for whom preparedness was simply the baseline condition of existence. She showed Lena to a room on the second floor that opened onto a view of the northern grounds, a room with ceilings high enough to seem almost impractical, wide windows that let in clean morning light, and furniture that was solid and dark and had the quality of things that had been in one place long enough to belong there completely. Lena's bag looked undersized on the chair, where she set it down. "Breakfast is at 8, Neva said. Lunch at 1. Dinner at 7. The kitchen is available at all hours. The library is in the east wing on the 3rd floor. The west wing is restricted." "What's in the west wing?" Lena asked. "The king's private quarters and the council chambers." "And if I take a wrong turn?" "Someone would find you promptly," Neva said, without any particular inflection. I recommend staying in the East Wing while you're still learning the building. How big is the building? Neva looked at her for a moment. Larger than it appears from the driveway, she said, and left. The first week was orientation, in the most comprehensive sense. Neva appeared each morning with a loose structure for the day that Lena was not required to follow, but which served as a guide through the estate's architecture, its people, its unwritten systems. Pack society had layers that took patience to read. There was a hierarchy, old and settled in the way that things were settled, when they had been in place long enough that people stopped questioning the shape of them and simply worked within it. At the center of it, in a way that was more functional than ceremonial, was Darian Voss, and everything in the estate moved in some relation to him without appearing to. The estate employed a large and varied staff. Lena made it a point to learn names quickly, because names mattered, and because being new somewhere was always easier when the people around you understood you had taken the effort to see them. She introduced herself simply and without ceremony. Most of them received her with a careful courtesy she recognized as the particular politeness of people who had not yet determined what you were, and therefore had not yet determined how much of themselves to offer. She got lost on the fourth day. It was entirely her own fault. She had turned left instead of right coming out of the library, and had ended up in a corridor she did not recognize that connected to another corridor she did not recognize that deposited her, via a staircase she would not have found intentionally, in a ground floor section of the estate where the smell was old wood and cold stone, rather than the warmer air of the main living floors. She stood at a junction looking at two identical-seeming doors and accepting that she had no useful information about which one led anywhere she had been before. Footsteps appeared in the corridor behind her. She turned. The man who had appeared was tall and broad, perhaps 40, with the kind of face that communicated, through years of practiced economy, that it was not a face that wasted expressions on situations that did not require them. He was in dark clothes, deliberate in their plainness, and he was looking at her with the steady attention of someone who knew exactly where they were, and had a reliable sense of why she was here, and did not consider any of it an emergency. "You're lost," he said. Flat, factual, not unkind. "I made a wrong turn out of the library." "Two wrong turns," he said. "The library exit that leads to this corridor requires right, right, left. You went left, right. So I was specifically wrong." "Specifically," he said. "I'm Cade, head of security." "Lena," she said, because her surname was presumably filed in every document in the building. "I know," he said. He walked her back without further conversation. She thanked him at the correct corridor. He produced a nod that she understood as acknowledgement and walked away. She got lost again on the sixth day in a different part of the building and waited, with slightly more composure this time, at a crossroads she did not recognize. Cade appeared within 40 seconds, which confirmed one of two things. Either the security infrastructure of this estate was impressively comprehensive, or Cade had a particular professional awareness of where she was at any given moment, or both, which was likely. He walked her back again. He did not comment on the repeat occurrence. On the seventh day she sat in on a morning briefing with Neva. She did not ask to be included. She asked if she could observe, which was a different question, and Neva paused for a moment that was precisely long enough to convey the complexity of the situation, and then said yes. The briefing covered logistics, a supply issue affecting the border settlements in the Northeast, and a scheduling matter related to a visiting group arriving in 3 weeks. The people in the room were professional and efficient, and spoke in the shorthand of people who had been working together long enough that they communicated in partial sentences and expected the other person to fill the rest correctly. She listened without contributing for 50 minutes. At the end, quietly, she asked one question about the supply issue: whether the communities in the border settlements had been informed of the resolution timeline, because in her experience, the way a problem was communicated mattered almost as much as whether the problem was solved, particularly with communities that had good reasons to be watchful about how information reached them. The room paused, just slightly. The logistics director, a practical woman named Ruth, who had the manner of someone who had stopped finding anything surprising some years ago, said crisply, "That's actually a useful point," and moved to the next item. Neva said nothing about it then or afterward, but the next morning's briefing schedule appeared, without comment, outside Lena's door. On the 8th day, Mara arrived. She came to the estate gate in a taxi with 2 bags and a typed document she presented to the security staff, explaining that she was Lena's personal assistant, retained to manage scheduling and communications during the transition period. The letterhead on the document bore Lena's bakery name, which was real, and the language of the document was formal and largely plausible, which was the best that could be said for it. The guard called Neva. Neva arrived, read the document, looked at Mara over the top of it, looked back at the document. "East Wing only," she said, and walked back inside. Mara appeared in Lena's doorway 5 minutes later with both bags, and the expression of someone who had just successfully negotiated something they were very pleased about. "Personal assistant," Lena said. "I assisted you personally, all the way from the city," Mara said. "That is technically accurate. You have a job." "I have several weeks of unused leave," Mara said, setting her bags down with the decisive thud of someone who had already decided, "And you, who are living in a building you have never been in before for 30 days, because you accidentally proposed marriage to a king," and it seemed to me that those 2 facts were relevant to each other. Lena looked at her for a long moment. She had not realized, until Mara was standing in the doorway, how much of her attention she had been spending on managing the strangeness of the place, rather than simply existing within it. Having someone familiar here, someone she did not have to organize herself for, redistributed that effort in a way that made everything slightly easier. "You're staying in the East Wing," she said. "Naturally," Mara said. Having Mara there changed the texture of the days without changing their substance. She was not involved in the briefings or the introductions or the navigation of the estate's hierarchy. She was simply present in the mornings and the evenings, familiar and uncomplicated and reliably herself, and that was worth more than Lena would have articulated if asked. Lord Saren appeared on the 11th day. She saw him first in the main reception hall, in conversation with 2 other men in suits, and the way he noticed her crossing the room was extremely deliberate for someone who appeared to be engaged elsewhere. He was perhaps 50, silver-haired, with the specific composure of a man who had long understood what position he occupied in any given room, and had made himself entirely comfortable there. He did not approach. He looked at her for 3 measured seconds, and returned to his conversation. The 3 seconds were enough. Lena had spent 11 years building a business in a world where people regularly underestimated her. Suppliers who assumed her margins were theirs to renegotiate. Competitors who read her youth and her gender as signals about her ceiling. Customers who thought a smile meant flexibility. She knew the particular quality of a look that preceded someone deciding you were a problem they had not budgeted for yet. Lord Saren gave her that look. She noted it and said nothing about it to anyone. 3 days later, she passed him in a corridor near the West Wing, and he stopped and greeted her by name, with a warmth so precisely calibrated that it contained no actual warmth at all. "How are you finding the adjustment?" he asked. "It must be rather a large change from what you're used to." "Everything new feels large at first," she said pleasantly. "I've always found that paying attention speeds the process up considerably." She kept walking. She did not look back. That evening she sat in her room and thought about what the next 18 days held, and about Darian, whom she had seen only a handful of times since arriving, briefly, in passing, and who had not sought her out or pressed her, which was either remarkable confidence or remarkable restraint, or both. She thought about the briefings and the questions she had asked, and Ruth's clipped approval. She thought about Cade's wordless route correction and Neva's quietly appearing schedule. She thought about the library on the 3rd floor, which she had been visiting every evening, and which smelled like old paper and something faintly resinous, and which she had begun to think of as hers, in the way she thought of her bakery counter as hers, not owned, but belonging to her in the specific way of places where your thinking became clearest. She was not comfortable yet. She did not expect to be, but she was paying attention, and paying attention was where she always started, and she had learned to trust where it led her. Something, she understood, was beginning. She could not yet name its shape, but she could feel its weight, and it was not a small thing. The 2nd week moved differently than the first. In the 1st week she had been mapping, learning the edges of the place and the people in it, operating with the careful deliberateness of someone who understood she was being watched and wanted to make sure the thing being watched was accurate. The 2nd week was different because the mapping had begun to settle. The corridors had started to feel like corridors she recognized, rather than corridors she was memorizing. She knew which stairs were fastest. She knew that the East Garden got full light until 11, and then became the best reading spot in the estate for the rest of the morning. She knew that Helene, the estate's head cook, arrived in the kitchen at 5:45, and that the first hour in there with her was the most productive time to have a conversation about anything food-related, because by 6:45 the breakfast service had claimed her entirely. She had gone to the kitchen on the 12th day and introduced herself without preamble. She said she was a pastry chef and asked if Helene would mind if she used a prep station in the off hours. Helene had looked her over with the frank assessment of a professional deciding whether another professional was worth respecting, and then asked what she specialized in. Lena told her, small pastries, bread, custard work, and a particular kind of honey-based filling she had been developing for 2 years. Helene said, "The cardamom goes in before the honey or after?" "Before, always," Lena said. "Otherwise the honey sits on top of everything, and the spice never opens." Helene had pointed to the prep station third from the left and told her it was hers when she needed it. On the 13th day, Lena made a batch of honey cardamom tarts in the afternoon and left half of them on the kitchen counter with a cloth over them, and brought the other half on a plate to Chancellor Neva's office, and knocked, and left them inside the door without waiting for an invitation or an explanation, because she had understood by now that Neva was a person who received things better when they were not accompanied by elaborate context. She sat in on 4 briefings during the second week. She continued asking 1 question per session, and she was careful to make the question practical rather than impressive, because there was a difference, and she knew what it was. In a briefing about infrastructure scheduling in the Middle Territories, she asked whether the contractors had been consulted about the weather window before the timeline was finalized, because she had noticed that the scheduled work fell in the first week of what historically was the region's wettest month. The room paused. Ruth looked up from her notes. They hadn't been consulted separately. They would have flagged it. "Then it might be worth a call before the contracts go out," Lena said. The timeline shifted by 3 weeks. Nobody mentioned that she was the reason. On the evening of the 14th day, she could not sleep. There was no specific cause she could point to. She had not had a difficult day. The evening had been quiet, a dinner she had attended with Mara, and 2 of the estate's senior staff who had been, if not warm, then at least genuinely engaged in the conversation she had brought. She lay still for an hour in the high-ceilinged room and let her mind move through the texture of things without directing it, and it would not quiet down, and eventually she accepted that. She dressed and went to the kitchen. The kitchen was dark when she pushed the door open, or it was nearly dark. There was a lamp on at the island, and by the light of it, sitting at the counter with files spread in front of him and a cup of something sending thin threads of steam into the air, was Darian Voss. He had not heard her come in, or if he had, it had not registered over whatever he was thinking about. His jacket was gone. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow. His hair had the slightly different quality of late night, less organized, the kind of difference that happened when your hands had been in it a few times while you were thinking. There was a pen behind his ear. He looked up when she came through the door. He did not look startled. He looked the way a person looked when something unexpected arrived, and they were deciding, in real time, whether it was welcome. She watched that decision happen in his expression, and watched it resolve. "I didn't know anyone was here," she said. "You couldn't sleep," he said. "No, you're working late. The morning sessions start early," he said. "The evening ones don't always end." She looked at the files on the counter, then at him, and she saw for the first time something that the daytime version of him did not show. In the day he was put together in the specific way of someone who had learned to be put together because the world required it. Here, at this hour, in this kitchen, with the pen behind his ear and the files around him, he looked like a person. Just a person, tired and thinking and real. She came in. She opened the cupboard where she had already located the bread and butter and found a pan in the rack she had sorted through 2 days ago. She built a grilled cheese with the focused attention she brought to any practical task, and made 2, because she was not the kind of person who prepared food in front of someone who had nothing, and felt at ease about it. She set a plate in front of him without asking. He looked at the plate. He looked at her. He picked it up and ate, and something about the ease of that, the lack of commentary or ceremony, made her feel that this was a person who received things simply when things were simply given. They sat in the kitchen together, and did not speak for a while. which was comfortable in a way she had not expected. She had not spent much time in comfortable silences with new people. She had come to understand, over the years, that the quality of a silence with someone told you something very specific about them, whether their quiet was full or empty, whether it was something they inhabited, or something they used as a cover for absence. His quiet was full, heavy, but full. "Can I ask you something?" she said, after a while. He set down the file he had returned to and looked at her across the counter. "You can ask me things," he said. "I may not always answer." "Understood." She turned her cup in her hands. "What is it actually like, being what you are, running what you run?" He held her gaze for a moment. She expected the answer that powerful people gave to this question, the organized overview that covered the surface without touching anything real, the version that acknowledged weight while maintaining perfect distance from it. He did not give her that answer. He was quiet in the way of someone who had not been asked this question, this specific version of it, by someone who was asking, only because they wanted to know. "It's two things at the same time," he said. "Always simultaneously." He looked at the counter. "It's a great deal of responsibility that you carry completely alone, because there is no one to hand it to, no moment when you put it down. When something goes wrong, you carry it. When something is uncertain, you carry that too." He paused. And then, underneath that, is just the ordinary experience of being a person. Being tired, wondering sometimes if you made the right call, wanting to be in a room where nobody is watching you to see what you'll do next. He looked up at her. Those two things live in the same place at the same time, and there is very little space to set one of them aside. Lena was quiet. "When was the last time you were in a room where nobody was watching?" she asked. Something moved in his face then. Not performed, not managed. Real, and quiet. And the kind of thing she understood not to press on. "I don't know," he said. "It has been a long time." She thought about what that cost. She thought about her bakery in the hours before opening, when it was just her and the ovens, and nobody needed anything from her, and she could exist without being observed. She thought about what it would mean to never have that, to have learned to live without it, because there was simply no alternative. "I'm sorry," she said, not dramatically, just plainly, because it was true. He looked at her. "You don't owe me an apology for that." "I know," she said. "I'm still sorry. Having no private version of yourself is a hard thing to live without." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. The kitchen was warm around them, the late-night warmth of a place that had been used all day and had not yet cooled. She could hear the building settling, the small sounds old buildings made when the temperature outside dropped. "My counsel has managed this position for 6 years," he said, "on the principle that everything should make sense, that every choice I make should be defensible and accountable, that there should be a clear reason for everything." He paused. "It is a reasonable principle. I believe in it." He held the cup in both hands. "And then you walked into a room and asked me a ridiculous question with no agenda behind it, and I found, for the first time in a considerable while, that I wanted to give an answer that also had no agenda behind it." "So you said agreed," she said. "So I said agreed," he confirmed. "And I have not wanted to take it back." Lena looked at him across the counter, in the warm dim of the kitchen at 2 in the morning, and what she felt was not the grand, overwhelming feeling she might have expected from a moment this improbable. It was smaller than that, and more solid. The feeling of something real, something that had not been produced by the situation, but had arrived in spite of it. She stood and picked up both plates, and took them to the sink and rinsed them, because she was incapable of leaving dishes in a kitchen sink under any circumstances, a habit so deeply ingrained, she performed it automatically without thinking. When she turned back, he was watching her, with that unguarded expression she was beginning to understand was the real one, the one that appeared when he stopped managing what his face showed. "Good night," she said. "Good night," he said. She went back upstairs. She lay down in the wide room, and looked at the high ceiling in the dark, and for the first time since arriving at this estate, she lay there not thinking about whether she would leave. She lay there thinking about what it would mean to stay. The thought did not frighten her, that was new. She held it for a while and felt its weight, and found that the weight was manageable, and then she turned over and closed her eyes and slept. The story ran on a Thursday morning, and Lena was in the kitchen with Helene testing a new laminated dough, when Mara appeared in the doorway, with her phone held out, and an expression that Lena had learned, over 11 years, to read as, "There is a situation, and I am delivering it to you because that is what I do in these moments." She took the phone. The article was on one of the regional news sites, not the most credible of them, but one with reach. The headline described her as a mystery woman. The subheading used the word inappropriate twice. The photographs were from her own social media, the public account she had set up for the bakery 4 years ago, a photograph from a going-away party for a friend, a photograph from a birthday dinner where everyone was mid-laugh, a photograph from an outdoor festival she had attended with Oliver and Mara, where the light was good and nobody was looking at the camera, because they were all looking at something off to the left that had been funny enough to turn everyone's head. Normal photographs, the kind of photographs that anyone who had a life and documented it occasionally produced. Placed next to the words questionable background and lifestyle inconsistencies, they became something else entirely. There was an anonymous source quoted twice. The language was careful in the legal sense, and reckless in every other. Lena read the article twice, fully, without rushing. Helene, who had seen it before Lena arrived because Helene saw everything before everyone else arrived, said nothing, but was applying the rolling pin to the dough with a firmness that expressed her feelings about the situation more clearly than words would have. Mara said quietly, "Cade told me there are 3 other outlets that have it ready to publish." Lena handed back the phone. She stood at the prep station with both hands on the counter and looked at the spice rack on the wall, the jars of cardamom and cinnamon and dried citrus she had organized herself on the 3rd day. She was running through what she was feeling with the same methodical honesty she brought to identifying what was wrong with a recipe, looking for the actual issue underneath the surface symptoms. She was not frightened, she was not overwhelmed. She was not even particularly angry, which she noted with mild interest because she had expected to be at least slightly angry. What she was clear. This was Lord Saren. She had no documented proof of that. She did not need documented proof to understand the architecture of it. She had seen the look in the corridor. She had heard the warmth that contained no warmth in his question about her adjustment. She had been waiting for the first move of a campaign, and here it was, recognizable in its form. The attempt to define someone before they had the chance to define themselves, using the materials of their ordinary life as evidence against them. She had played versions of this game in smaller arenas, the supplier who had circulated a story about delivery problems that had not been hers, the local competitor who had put something on a neighborhood forum about her sourcing, different scale, identical logic. She turned to Mara. "I need to talk to whoever manages communications for the estate." Mara blinked. She had been holding the phone with the expression of someone waiting for a reaction she had not yet received. "You're not." "Not what?" Lena said. "Upset. Or worried. Or—" "I'm focused," Lena said. "Who handles communications?" His name was Owen, and he was young for the role, perhaps 28, with the slightly frayed quality of someone who was genuinely very good at his job and had been given more of it than the formal title suggested. He was at his desk with 3 screens open when Lena knocked and walked in, and he stood up with the expression of someone who had not known whether to expect her or not, and had decided to be ready either way. "I've seen it," he said. "Good," she said. "Sit down." She sat down across from him and put her notepad on his desk, because she had brought a notepad and a pen, because that was what she brought to problem-solving conversations. "We're not going to write a denial." He looked at her. "Denials tell people there is something to deny," she said. "They spend the energy defending the frame instead of changing it. We're going to give people a different thing to look at." "A different thing," he repeated, and she could see him arriving at the same place she was. "A story, a real one. From me, directly, unscripted, short enough that it doesn't look managed, honest enough that it doesn't need to be." She uncapped the pen. "People are not going to respond to being told that those photographs are out of context. They'll just think we're managing them. But they will respond to knowing who I actually am, because knowing who someone actually is makes contextless photographs very difficult to sustain." Owen was quiet for a moment. She could see him thinking through it, checking it against what he knew about how these things moved. Then something in his posture settled, the specific settling of someone who has been waiting for a direction that fits the shape of the problem. "1 interview," he said. 1. Unscripted. No prepared answers. Nothing where I'm reading from something or sitting in a room that looks like I've been coached. I know a journalist at the Central Tribune, he said. Her name is Claire. She doesn't editorialize. She publishes what people actually say, without shaping it. She's been doing it for 15 years. Set it up, Lena said. The interview happened 2 days later in a small meeting room on the estate's ground floor. Claire arrived with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a voice recorder she placed on the table between them, and a manner that was direct without being adversarial, which Lena appreciated immediately. She answered everything Claire asked. She talked about her bakery, about the neighborhood she had grown up in, about her grandmother's recipe box on the shelf above the front counter. She talked about what had brought her here, not with all the details but with enough honesty that the honesty was audible. When Claire asked about the article, Lena said, without any heat, that she understood why the presence of someone like her in this particular situation might seem surprising to people, because it was surprising to her too, and that in her experience, the most useful response to being mischaracterized was not to argue with the characterization, but to let people see the actual thing. When Claire asked whether she was ready for the level of scrutiny that came with a role like this, Lena thought for a moment and then said, I've run a bakery since I was 22. I've managed health inspections and supplier disputes, and customers who decided to renegotiate prices after they had already eaten most of what they ordered. I'm familiar with scrutiny. It usually involves less paperwork than this. Claire looked up from her notepad and said nothing, but her expression said enough. The interview ran 4 days after it was filmed. Owen appeared at Lena's door the morning it went up and said, with the careful containment of a professional who was not accustomed to sharing good news too enthusiastically, in case something changed, It's doing well. How well? Lena said. Very, he said. The regional channels are sharing it. The response is largely, he paused, choosing the word, supportive. Good, Lena said. The 3 outlets that had picked up the original story have quietly moved on to other things. Also good. He looked at her for a moment, in the way he had sometimes looked at her since that first conversation, like he was still updating his assessment of what she was. The anonymous source hasn't resurfaced, he said. It won't, she said. Not from certainty about the future, but from understanding about the present. The value of the source had depended on an environment in which the story could hold. That environment no longer existed. She was right. The source did not resurface. 2 days after the interview ran, Neva mentioned in passing, during a morning briefing, that a council position in the far northern territory had come available, and that Lord Sarin had been assigned to it, effective the following week. She said it in the neutral tone she used for logistical information. She moved to the next item on the schedule without pausing. Nobody at the table said anything about it. Lena was crossing the East Wing corridor that afternoon when she heard steps behind her. She turned. Cade was walking in the same direction, not close, not hurried, his expression as economical as always. As she turned, he looked at her, briefly. The corner of his mouth moved. It was barely there, just the smallest fraction of an expression, but it was unmistakably something. Something like a mark of acknowledgement, or what acknowledgement looked like on a face that used expressions as sparingly as currency. Lena counted it as a significant event. That evening she encountered Darian in the corridor outside the library. He was coming from the direction of the West Wing with a folder under one arm, the focused quality he carried in the daytime setting around him, like something habitual. He slowed when he saw her. The interview, he said. Yes, she said. You didn't ask anyone here to clear it first. She held his gaze. Was I supposed to? He was quiet for a moment. In the corridor light, his expression was very readable, which was unusual for the daytime version of him, and which she noted. No, he said. It was the right call. I know, she said, simply, without any edge to it. He looked at her, and there it was again, the quality she had first seen in the kitchen, that openness that arrived when his guard came down, without him deciding to lower it. He had not decided to lower it now. It had come down anyway. Thank you, he said. She nodded, because the word was genuine and deserved a genuine response, and genuine responses did not always require sentences. She kept walking. He kept walking. But the corridor felt different behind her than it had on the way in, and she thought about that for the rest of the evening, the specific way in which something can change, Not because anything visible has happened, but because a weight that was there before is no longer there. Things that had been uncertain were beginning to settle. Not everything. Enough. The visitors arrived on the 25th day, and Lena heard the cars before she saw them. She was in the library, in the chair she had come to think of as hers, because she always found it warm in the right way in the afternoon, and because nobody else seemed to use it, and she heard the particular sound of 3 vehicles arriving at once, which had a different quality from 1 or 2. There was something in the way they moved that she could hear even through the window, unhurried and organized, the sound of people who were accustomed to arriving at places and having those places adjust to them. She stayed in the library. Mara found her there 20 minutes later, closing the door carefully behind her and sitting down in the chair across the reading table, with an expression that meant she had gathered information and was about to present it. 3 Alpha Lords, she said, from the outer territories. I got this from Cade. She paused. He communicated it with his eyes. I am becoming fluent in that. What's the purpose? Lena said. Owen told me, in that precise way he has of saying things without technically saying them, that there has been conversation among the outer territories about the king's current situation. She looked at Lena directly. Meaning you. They want to understand whether his judgment has been, in their language, compromised. Lena set her book down. When is the dinner? Tonight, 7. She had 5 hours. She used them sensibly, finished what she was reading, walked the north grounds for 40 minutes because walking helped her think without making her think too hard, went to the kitchen, and helped Helene for an hour, because working with her hands always settled something, and borrowed a blouse from Mara, because it was the right occasion for something she had not brought with her. The formal dining room was on the ground floor, in a part of the estate she had only passed through before, large and deliberate, with a table long enough to seat 20, and set tonight for 8. There were candles, dark wood, the specific smell of Helene's kitchen carried through from 2 rooms away, which Lena recognized like a signature by now. The 3 lords were already at the table when she came in with Darian, who had appeared at the corridor that led to the dining room and fallen into step beside her, which was not something they had discussed, and which she understood, without it needing to be said, as a considered signal. Darian introduced them, Aldrich, broad and deliberate, perhaps 50, the kind of man who understood his physical presence as a professional tool, and used it with practiced precision. Felix, younger, mid-30s, with quick eyes that moved around the table like they were cataloging everything and deciding what mattered. And Callum, the eldest, perhaps 60, silver-haired, wearing his authority with the ease of someone who had long since stopped needing to demonstrate it, and was therefore, Lena recognized immediately, the one worth watching most carefully. The first hour of the dinner was civil and careful. The conversation moved through territorial governance and trade matters in the eastern settlements, and a technical point about border protocol that she followed at the edges without contributing. She ate. She listened. She did not rush to establish herself, because she had learned in professional settings that the surest way to lose a room was to try too hard to hold it. She watched Callum. He was doing what she was doing, watching without appearing to, gathering information through a quality of attention that looked like general interest, but was something more specific. He looked at her 3 times in the first hour. Each time was brief, and each time told her something. The first look said, "Who are you?" The second said, "I'm still deciding." And the third said, "I'm not done." She held his gaze on the third one, briefly, without challenge, just acknowledgement, and then looked back at her food. The shift came in the third course. Aldrich was speaking about leadership accountability and the weight of decisions in positions of governance, which was a conversation she understood to be aimed at Darian through the language of principle. He was saying that a leader's credibility was built on consistency, and that consistency required, as its foundation, a stable and predictable decision-making environment. He said this with the particular care of someone who was placing words in a specific pattern for a specific purpose. He looked at her when he finished. The look lasted 2 seconds. The table held its breath in the way tables did when someone had done something, and everyone was waiting to see whether it would be answered or absorbed. Lena picked up her water glass and took a small sip. She set it down. She looked at Aldrich with the pleasant, attentive expression she had developed through years of customer-facing work. The expression that said, "I have heard every word you said, and I am fully engaged with it. You're right that credibility depends on consistency, she said, in the same even tone she used when she disagreed with a supplier's delivery estimate. The interesting question is what actually produces consistency, whether it comes from keeping everything familiar, or whether it comes from the quality of the judgment itself, which can hold regardless of what the surrounding elements look like. She held his gaze. A recipe that has always worked can stop working when the context changes. The baker who understands why it works is in a much better position than the one who only knows the steps. The adaptability is in the understanding, not in repeating the same conditions. She let it rest. Aldrich looked at her. His expression had moved. Not to agreement, but to something more complicated, which was the thing she had been aiming for. Felix, across the table, produced a sound that was almost certainly suppressed amusement, very poorly suppressed. At the head of the table, Callum had not moved. He was looking at her with a quality of attention that was entirely different from the 3 looks he had given her before. This was not assessment, this was consideration, which was a distinction she understood well. The dinner continued. Helene's dessert arrived and received genuine approval. More wine was poured. The conversation broadened, became less careful, moved toward things that were actually interesting rather than things that were strategically useful, which was always a sign that a room had reached some kind of resolution. Callum spoke to her directly for the first time in the last 20 minutes. He asked, briefly, and without ceremony, about the bakery, and she told him about it without performing modesty or false smallness, because she had built a good thing, and she saw no reason to pretend otherwise. He listened with his full attention and then said, "My wife bakes," and somehow, this was more informative than anything he had said the entire evening. When the dinner was over and the lords had retired to the guest wing, Darian found her in the garden. She had gone out through the south entrance because the night was warm and she wanted air before going back upstairs. The garden's stone bench under the old tree had become a regular stop, a place she came to when she needed to be outside and still. She was sitting there with her hands in her lap when she heard him on the path. He sat at the other end of the bench, not close, not far. The garden was very quiet, and the sky above the tree was full of stars that had no awareness of the dinner that had just happened, or its implications. "None of that was in any brief," he said. "I didn't have a brief," she said. "How did you know what to say?" "I didn't," she said. "I said what I thought, the same way I always do." He was quiet for a moment. She could see his profile against the lighter sky, the line of his jaw, the stillness that was no longer a performed stillness, but the real one, the natural default of someone who had made peace with being still. "I need to tell you something," he said. She waited. "I do not want you to leave at the end of 30 days. He said it in the direct, plain way he said things when they were most true, without organizing the words for effect. Not as a provision of the accord, not as a political arrangement, not because of tonight, though tonight was. He paused, briefly. Not because of any one thing. He looked at her. "I want you to stay because I want you here, because what has been happening between us in this building over the past 3 weeks is something I haven't had before, and I don't want to find out what it's like to lose it." Lena looked at the garden ahead of them. The tree above them moved in a small wind, a sound like something settling. She had known something like this was coming. She was good at knowing when something was coming, at reading the approach of a thing in the small signals that preceded it. She had felt this building in the kitchen, and the corridors, and the briefings, and the evenings, the accumulation of a thing that had no specific moment of origin, but that had weight. Knowing it was coming did not make the moment simple. "I need 2 days," she said. He looked at her. "I need to go home," she said, "to my own kitchen, and my own apartment, and my own space, where I can think, without the weight of this building around me. I need 2 days in my own life to make a decision about whether I'm choosing a different one." He looked at her steadily. Then, "All right?" The word arrived without negotiation, without any of the pressure she might have expected from someone who had just said something that put him in a vulnerable position and was now watching the person he said it to ask for distance. "You said at the start that the choice would be yours," he said. "I meant it then." She looked at him. She held his gaze in the dark for a moment. Then she stood, and he stood when she stood, the same natural reflex she had noticed from the beginning, and she said good night, and walked back toward the south entrance and up to her room. She lay awake for a long time. But it was not the wakeful tension of uncertainty. It was the wakefulness of someone who had too much to think about to sleep, and who knew, somewhere underneath the thinking, what they were going to decide. She was going home for 2 days. She already knew she was coming back. She drove herself. She had packed a small bag the night before, just enough for 2 days, and in the morning, she had said goodbye to Mara, who had looked at her with the expression she used when she was choosing not to say 5 things she could easily say, and she had gone to the vehicle bay, where Cade was standing, near a car with keys in hand, offering without speaking. "I'll take my own," she said. He looked at her for a moment, in the way Cade assessed things, briefly and completely. Then he stepped aside, and she got into the car she had arrived in weeks ago, and drove south, through the long road that wound through trees and open land, and brought the city back into view, at the point where the trees thinned, and the sky became bigger and more ordinary. The city was exactly as she had left it. This was the thing that struck her first, which should not have been surprising but was slightly. She had been gone for 3 weeks, and the city had continued to be entirely itself in her absence, unconcerned and unchanged, the same streets in the same order, the same particular smell of the bakery district when she turned onto her block, which was flour and sugar, and the particular quality of morning air in a street where things were made by hand every day, regardless of what was happening in anyone's private life. She parked. She sat in the car, with her hands in her lap. She looked at her building. She had lived in this apartment for 2 years, and before that, in a place a few streets over, for 4 years, and before that, in a small room, above her first commercial kitchen, for 2 years, while she saved money, and built the business from nothing. And in all of those places the city had been the same city, her city, the one she knew in the particular bone-deep way of people who had never left, and did not want to. She went up. Her apartment felt smaller. That was the first thing. Not worse, not less hers, just smaller, the specific smallness of the familiar after an absence, when you return to a space you know completely, and find that your knowledge of it is so complete that it requires less of your attention than it used to, which made it feel contained in a way it had not felt before she left. She walked through it and touched things, the wooden spoon in the crock on the counter, the recipe box, the particular creak of the 3rd floorboard from the kitchen doorway. She knew where everything was without looking for it. That familiarity was real and good. Her grandmother's recipe box was on the shelf exactly where she had left it, tied with the rubber band she had replaced 6 months ago when the old one finally gave out, after years of daily use. She touched it. She made tea. She stood at the kitchen window and looked at the street below, and did not try to organize her thinking. She just let it move. She let the estate and the weeks and the conversations and the kitchen at 2 in the morning and the dinner table and Derry and Voss, all of it, move through her without directing it, the way she let a sauce reduce without stirring it every 30 seconds, trusting the process without controlling it. Her phone had messages she had let accumulate. Oliver about a flour delivery that had arrived damaged, 3 messages from her mother that varied in length and urgency, a message from George asking how things were going. She answered Oliver first because it was practical, and because she felt immediately capable of solving a flour delivery problem, and capable was a useful feeling to inhabit. Then she called her mother. Her mother picked up on the 2nd ring, which meant she had been waiting. "Tell me," her mother said. "All of it," Lena said, "or the version you want." "All of it," her mother said. "I've been waiting 2 weeks for all of it." She told her everything, the full version, which she had not told anyone in its completeness, not even Mara, who had pieces of it, but not the shape of the whole. She told her about the bar and the word, and the documents, and the 30-day offer, and the library, and the kitchen, at 2 in the morning, and the briefings, and Owen and Helene and Cade's near smile, and the dinner, and the garden, and what had been said on the bench under the old tree. Her mother listened without interrupting, which was a specific gift she had, the ability to hold space for a story, without inserting herself into it, until it was finished. When Lena was done, her mother was quiet for a moment. "You're afraid of wanting something that doesn't come with a guarantee," she said. "Everyone is afraid of that," Lena said. "Yes," her mother agreed. "But you especially. Because when you commit to something, you commit entirely. You don't build things halfway. You know that about yourself." Lena looked out the window. A couple were walking past on the street below, with a dog that was very interested in something on the pavement. Ordinary Friday life, moving at its ordinary pace. Is it real? Her mother asked. What you feel when you're there. She thought about the kitchen, the specific warmth of it, the way he had taken the plate she offered without making it into anything more than it was, the way he had answered her question about what it was like to be what he was, not with the organized public version, but with the honest one that cost something to say. She thought about standing in a briefing room and asking a question about weather windows and the timeline shifting. She thought about Owen's satisfied expression after the interview ran, and Helene's hand on her shoulder the morning after the tarts. She thought about the garden and the bench and the specific quality of the dark above the old tree. She thought about who she had been in each of those moments. She thought about whether she had been more or less herself. It's real, she said. Then you know, her mother said, and there was nothing more to say about it, and they talked for 20 more minutes about smaller things. A recipe her mother had been trying, a cousin's news, the color her mother was thinking of painting the hallway, and when they hung up, Lena felt anchored in the specific way of someone who has been reminded who they are, by someone who knew them before they became anyone in particular. She went to the bakery at noon. Oliver was there. He looked up from the front counter when the door opened, and his face organized itself into the specific expression he had for occasions when something good had happened, and he was not sure how much to show it. You're here, he said. Just for 2 days, she said. How's the flour situation? Resolved, he said. The supplier is sending a replacement delivery tomorrow, and taking 20% off the next order. Good, she said. She went through to the kitchen and put on an apron, her own apron, the one that knew her hands, and Oliver, who understood her better than most, said nothing about it, and simply moved to give her space at the prep station. She worked for 4 hours. She made the cardamom honey tarts, finally, with the ratio she had been working toward for 2 weeks, the honey added before the cardamom bloomed and then the balance of it after, and she knew before they came out of the oven that she had found it. She made 2 loaves of bread, because the action of making bread was what her hands did when she needed to think without trying to think. She made shortbread because shortbread was simple and repeatable, and let her mind go wherever it needed to go, without the recipe requiring her back. Oliver ate 3 pieces of shortbread over the course of the afternoon, and said nothing about any of it, which was its own kind of conversation. Mara arrived at 6 through the back door, the way she always arrived when she wanted to bypass the front counter, and climbed onto the prep counter opposite Lena in the way she had been doing since they were 20, which Lena had never approved of and had stopped objecting to years ago. Well, Mara said. Well, Lena said, checking the tarts. Did you figure it out? Lena set the tray on the cooling rack. She looked at Mara. I figured out that it's real, she said. What I feel there. It's not something I invented, because the circumstances are unusual. That's good, Mara said carefully. It's also complicated, Lena said. Because what comes after a decision like this isn't small. There are centuries of political structure attached to it. There are people who are actively hostile to my presence there. There's an entire world that has rules I'm still learning, and that pushes back sometimes when I apply the rules I already know. Mara looked at her. But, she said, but I built a bakery from a rented oven and a second-hand mixer and a notebook of my grandmother's recipes, Lena said. I know how to start from nothing and build something that holds. Mara was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, simply, the question she always asked when she was cutting to the actual center of something. Does he make you feel like less of yourself or more? It was the right question. It was always the right question, and Mara had always known that. Lena thought about who she was in the briefings, and at the dinner table, and in the corridor with Saren, and in the kitchen at 2 in the morning. She thought about the question she had asked about the weather window, and the response it had received. She thought about the interview, and the specific calm with which she had given it. She thought about the stone bench in the garden, and what she had felt sitting there, which was not diminished, or managed, or arranged for someone else's benefit. It was herself, clearly and completely. More, she said. Mara got down from the counter. She picked up a piece of shortbread from the cooling tray, and took a bite, and looked at Lena with the expression that meant everything necessary had been said. Then there's your answer, she said, with her mouth full, which was very Mara, and very exactly right. Lena went home. She made dinner and ate it, and called Oliver to tell him she would be in for 2 hours the next morning before she drove back. She packed her bag again, this time larger, because there was no reason anymore to pack as though 30 days was a temporary arrangement. She added the recipe box, not because she could not leave it behind, because she did not want to. She was up early. She was in the bakery by 7, and out by 9. She stopped at the top of the stairs to her apartment building and looked at the street one more time. At her street, the street she had walked on all her life, and she stayed there for a moment and let herself feel what it was to love a place you were not leaving, because you could love 2 places at once if you were honest about both of them. Then she went down the stairs and got in the car. She was going back. The morning guards at the estate gate recognized her car, and the gate opened before she had fully stopped. She had not called ahead. She had made a deliberate choice about that the night before, packing the recipe box and the larger bag, and deciding that the return should be on her terms, which meant arriving the way she arrived at her bakery every morning, without ceremony, without announcement, simply showing up because she had decided to be there. She drove up the long driveway with the windows down, and the early morning light making the stones of the building glow in a way they only did at this specific hour, which she knew now, because she had been here long enough to know what the building looked like at different times of day. That knowledge felt like something, like a kind of belonging that had accumulated without her noticing it accumulate. She parked. She took her bags from the back seat, both of them. She went inside. Neva was in the main hall, with a cup in one hand and a folder in the other, looking at a wall calendar, with the focused attention of someone constructing the architecture of the coming week. She heard the door and turned, and when she saw Lena she stopped in the specific way of someone who had not been certain what to expect, and was now adjusting to what had arrived. "You're early," she said. "I know," Lena said. "Is he in his study?" Neva paused. For Neva, a pause was the equivalent of a long silence in anyone else. "He arrived there about an hour ago," she said. "He does not usually work this early." Lena did not say thank you, because she was already walking. She went through the corridors she knew now, right from the main hall, left at the first junction, past the library where the smell of old paper reached her, even through the closed door, past the small sitting room she had once mistaken for a pantry, past the window at the end of the passage that faced east, and was always full of light at this hour. She reached the study door at the end of the hall. She did not knock. She pushed the door open and walked in. Darian was standing at the far window with his back to the room, looking out at the northern grounds. The morning was doing something specific with the light out there, making the grass look finer than it was, making the whole landscape look like something considered rather than simply existing. He was holding a cup in one hand and had the other in his pocket, which was the posture of someone who was not working but thinking, or perhaps had been working, but had stopped when the thinking overtook the work. He turned when she came through the door. She saw it, just for a fraction of a second, before his expression settled into itself. She saw what had been there, while he was alone in this room, at an unusually early hour, with a cup he was not drinking from. He had not been certain she was coming back. He had not shown that to anyone, but in the unguarded instant before he registered who had walked through the door, it was there, the weight of having waited without knowing the outcome. Then he saw her, and something in his face resolved. "You're back," he said. "I'm back," she said. She crossed the room and stood between the bookshelves and the window, in the morning light, and looked at him the way she looked at things when she had already made her decision, and was now simply being present with it. "I have terms," she said. He did not speak. He waited. The way he waited for things, completely, without filling the space. She had worked through them carefully over the past 2 days, not in the anxious way of someone trying to protect themselves, but in the practical way of someone building something they intended to last. She had written them down in her own handwriting, on a sheet of paper from the notepad on her kitchen counter, the same notepad where she wrote recipe adjustments and supply orders, and the small notes she left herself about things she wanted to try. She had not brought the paper with her. She did not need it. "I'm not going to be a decoration," she said. "I won't stand in rooms looking appropriate, and say appropriate things, and mean nothing by any of it. If I'm here, I'm actually here. That means a real role, real work, real weight, in decisions where my perspective is relevant. Not managed visibility, and not a carefully curated image, the actual thing." He nodded, once. I keep the bakery, she said. My name stays on it. Oliver runs the day-to-day, but I go back regularly. I stay involved in the decisions about it. It's not a symbolic gesture, and it's not a hobby. It's my business, and I built it, and I'm not setting it aside. Agreed, he said. The kitchen here is mine in the evenings and the early mornings, and nobody schedules anything over those hours without asking me first. Understood. I won't be coached, she said. I'll learn the protocols. I know there are centuries of them, and I'm not dismissing that. I'm telling you, I'll learn them on my own terms, not through someone standing beside me, telling me what to say next. When I speak in a room, it will be because I have something to say, and not because someone has approved the words in advance. I would not want that, he said. And she believed him, because she had spent 3 weeks learning to read, when he meant what he said. And he meant this. She held his gaze for a moment. And I need us to actually be something, she said. Not a working arrangement. Not a political partnership that holds press conferences and sits at the right distance from each other in public. I mean the kitchen at 2 in the morning, and the honest disagreements, and the hard days, and the real ones. She paused. The kind of thing that requires both people to actually show up for it. The room was quiet. He set his cup down on the windowsill and turned to face her fully, and in the morning light she could see him completely, the slight shadows under his eyes that told her he had not been sleeping well, the steadiness in his expression that was not performed steadiness but the real kind, the equilibrium that came from someone who had made the decision to be entirely present. Yes, he said, I can do that. I want to do that. She was looking for the gap. She was always looking for the gap. The small inconsistency between what someone said and what they intended that appeared when the commitment was not solid. She had learned to look for it over years of reading people in professional situations, in supplier negotiations, and difficult conversations with customers, and the moments when someone's yes was actually a no, dressed in polite language. She did not find it in him. She had not expected to find it, but she had needed to look. All right, she said. She crossed the last distance between them and held out her hand. He looked at it, and something crossed his face that she had not seen before, something that held the full weight of the past weeks in it. The bar, and the word, and the 30 days, and the kitchen, and the garden bench, all of it compressed into a single expression that was somewhere between the beginning of amusement and something much more serious than that. He took her hand. His grip was the same as it had been at the bar the night they met, the night she had walked across a room with a birthday joke and changed everything without meaning to. Firm, unhurried, with no performance in it, the grip of someone who made commitments and kept them. Agreed, he said. The word was the same word it had always been, but it landed differently now. The first time it had fallen into the air like something unexpected, like a stone dropped into still water, and she had not known what it meant, or whether it meant anything. This time it was grounded. It had the weight of everything that had been built in the space between then and now. She let go of his hand. I need coffee, she said, and I need to find Neva and have an actual conversation about what a real role looks like in practice, because I've been thinking about it, and I have specific ideas about the border settlement communication structure that I want to raise. Something in his expression shifted, and she recognized it now. The thing that happened when he was genuinely pleased and did not have a way to organize the expression into anything more contained. I'll come with you, he said, reaching for his jacket from the chair. You don't need to. I know that, he said. I want to. She looked at him for a moment, in the bright study with the east-facing windows and the bookshelves lining the walls and the cup on the windowsill that he had not been drinking from, and she thought about all the things that had brought her here, a birthday and a joke and a word and 30 days, and she thought about the fact that none of those things had felt like the beginning of anything at the time, and they had been the beginning of everything. All right, she said. They went out into the corridor together, and the estate around them was beginning its day, the sounds of it reaching them through walls and floors, the ordinary machinery of a place that was waking up. She walked beside him down the hallway toward the main hall, where Neva would be with her folder and her calendar and her precise and indispensable organizational mind, and she thought about what she was going to say about the border settlement communication structure, and she thought about the recipe she was going to test this evening in Helene's kitchen, and she thought, briefly, and with the particular clarity that came from having made a decision and being at peace with it, that this was what choosing felt like when you chose the right thing. Not a fanfare, not a grand transformation, just the very ordinary and completely extraordinary feeling of being exactly where you were supposed to be, doing what you were supposed to do, with a person you had not planned to find and were very glad you had. Behind them, the study was bright and empty and quiet, the windows facing east, the morning coming through. And ahead of them, the day was only just starting. The announcement went out on a Tuesday morning, through official channels, in language that was measured and clear. It stated that King Darian Voss had entered into a formal partnership with Lena Calloway of the city's South District, a partnership intended as a precursor to a formal union under the laws of the Northern Territories and the ancient binding accord. It was 3 paragraphs. It contained no photographs. It was released at 8 in the morning, and by 9 it was everywhere. Lena was in the kitchen with Helene when Owen appeared in the doorway and held up his phone with the expression of someone who was professionally required to remain calm, but was finding the requirement somewhat taxing. "It's out," he said. "Good," she said. She was rolling dough and did not stop. Mara, who had appeared behind Owen at some point in the previous 30 seconds, was already scrolling through her own phone with the focused intensity of someone reading field reports. "The South District forums are very excited," she said. "The Northern Council's public statement channel has posted a message of congratulations that is technically warm, but contains the word stability 4 times. Noted," Lena said. "There's a faction on the regional platform that is calling this historically unprecedented. It is historically unprecedented. They don't mean it as a compliment." "I know," Lena said. "They'll come around or they won't. We have work to do either way." The first week after the announcement was the kind of week that asked a great deal of everyone in a building and gave very little back in the short term. The communications volume alone required Owen to bring in 2 additional staff members. Letters arrived from territory representatives, some welcoming and some cautiously neutral, and some that said congratulations, in language that meant the opposite. Neva managed the flow of it with the composed efficiency that was her fundamental mode of existence, routing things to the right people and filtering out the things that did not require attention, and doing all of this without appearing to be doing anything in particular. Lena came to each briefing having read the relevant background. She asked questions that mattered. She pushed back twice in the first week, on decisions she thought were being made for the wrong reasons, once about the framing of a communication to the eastern settlements, and once about the timeline for a resource allocation that she believed had been constructed around what was administratively convenient, rather than what was practically effective. Both times she was direct, and gave her reasoning, and did not make the disagreement into anything more than it was. Both times, the decision was revisited. She noticed people beginning to update their understanding of what she was. Not a decoration, not a story, not an accident that had been absorbed into the system. Something that had its own weight and used it. The outer territory representatives came in a slow sequence over the following weeks. She met each one and she came to each meeting, having done the specific work of finding out what their territory was actually dealing with, what the real pressures were underneath the diplomatic language, what they needed from the central administration that they were not currently getting. She asked about those things directly, and listened to the answers without organizing her response before they had finished speaking, and she wrote notes in her own handwriting, and followed up on things she had said she would follow up on. Some of them thawed quickly. A few from the eastern territories who had been loudest in their skepticism before the announcement became, after 2 or 3 direct conversations, among the most straightforward to work with. She understood this because she had always understood it. People who were honest in their opposition were easier to work with than people who were politely withholding, because with the honest ones, you knew exactly where you stood and could build from there. Lord Saren sent a formal letter of congratulation from the far north that was impeccably worded and contained nothing genuine, and she filed it and did not spend more energy on it than that. Callum, the eldest of the 3 lords who had come to the dinner, sent a short handwritten note that said only, "Well done." She kept that one in the desk drawer in the room she was beginning to think of as her office, because it was hers now, and had been rearranged to hold the things she actually needed, rather than the things it had held before. Felix sent a book on Northern Territorial history, with annotations in the margins, from what appeared to be several generations of previous readers, and she spent 3 evenings working through it in the library, and found it more useful than most of the formal briefing documents she had been given. Aldrich sent nothing. She had expected that. It told her what she needed to know, and she moved on. The estate itself began to shift around her in the way that places shifted when a new person had been in them long enough to change their gravity. Helene gave her a key to the kitchen's herb storage, which was Helene's version of a formal welcome and meant more than any document could have. Cade stopped appearing around corners in the corridor outside her room at the exact moment she stepped out of it, which she understood meant he had stopped monitoring her movements as a potential security variable and had reclassified her as something else entirely. Ruth began sending her the logistics reports directly, rather than waiting for them to reach her through Neva, which meant Ruth had decided she could be trusted to read them and form her own views. Neva said, one morning about 3 weeks after the announcement, while handing Lena the day's schedule, the border settlement communication project is on track. The response rate from the first outreach is 63% higher than the previous cycle. She said it in the neutral tone she used for all information, but she made eye contact when she said it, which was Neva's version of a great deal. Mara went home at the end of the 5th week after the announcement. She had stayed far longer than her original unused leave covered, which had required a series of increasingly creative conversations with her office, and the creative capacity of those conversations had finally run out. The morning she left was early and cool, and Lena walked her to the car, and they stood beside it for a moment, the way they always stood beside things, when they were not ready to let go of them, but were going to anyway. "You're good here," Mara said. "Not a question." "Yes," Lena said. "Really good. Not performing good. Actually good." "I know." Mara looked at her with the expression she had used since they were 15, to communicate things that were too large or too important to fit inside regular words. "I'm proud of you," she said. "Not for this. For being exactly yourself inside all of this." Lena held on to her for a moment. "Call me," Mara said. "Every day," Lena said. "Every day," Mara confirmed, and got in the car. Lena stood in the driveway until the car turned the corner and was gone, and then she stood there a moment longer in the cool morning, the estate behind her, the grounds quiet, the northern sky doing what the northern sky did in the early hours before the day fully arrived. She turned and went back inside. There were hard things ahead, and she was not naive about them. The political landscape of the territories was intricate and historical, and had fault lines that did not simply smooth because one variable had changed. 3 territory disputes were pending mediation, and she had been reading the files on each one, with the particular attention she gave to things she was still learning, and not yet authorized to touch, but intended to understand completely, before she was. The question of her formal role, and what it meant in practical terms, was still being constructed, week by week, in the space between what the Accord defined and what she and Darian were building in the actual living of their days together. They had their disagreements. The first real one had been about how to handle a public statement following a difficult council session, and it had been a good disagreement, the kind where both people said what they actually thought, and neither of them performed the argument, and the outcome was better than either starting position. The second had been about something smaller, the timing of a meeting she felt had been scheduled without adequate consideration of what else was happening that week, and that one had required him to accept that she was right and say so, which he did, without hedging it. She learned things about him that she had not known, and that the bar, and the 30 days, and the negotiations had not yet revealed. She learned that he woke before 5 almost every morning, and was at his desk before anyone else arrived, and that this was not a power performance, but simply how he had always worked, since before he held the title, since before anyone was watching. She learned that he had a specific patience with certain kinds of people that surprised her, a genuine and unhurried tolerance for those who needed more time to arrive at things, and that this patience existed alongside, and was not in conflict with his absolute intolerance for dishonesty or evasion. She learned that when he was genuinely amused, he went very still before the expression appeared, the way still water sometimes went perfectly flat just before the wind reached it. She learned that he noticed things about her that she had not expected him to notice. He did not say much about what he noticed, because he was not a person who said much about things he observed, but the noticing was there in small ways. The way he ensured there was always good cardamom in the kitchen. The way he had, without being asked, arranged for a direct delivery line from her bakery's flour supplier to the estate kitchen, so she did not have to coordinate it separately. The way he had left Felix's annotated book outside her door one morning, when he knew she had been looking for it, and it had been misplaced in the reshuffling of the library. Small things. The kind of things that accumulated over time, into something that could not be taken apart. The first time she brought a tray of the completed cardamom honey tarts, finally perfected, to a formal meeting with 3 council members and Neva and Owen, and set them on the table and said help yourselves in exactly the tone she used when she put out samples at the bakery counter, there was a moment of collective uncertainty about what to do, and then Neva, of all people, reached for one first, and the moment resolved. After the meeting, Owen caught up with her in the corridor. He said, without any preamble, that was exactly right. She understood that he was not talking only about the tarts. She was in the kitchen the night she heard Darian's footsteps in the corridor, for the first time since she had returned. It was past 2 in the morning. She had been unable to sleep, which happened less often now but still happened sometimes, and she had come down and found Helene's kitchen exactly as it always was at this hour, warm and quiet and entirely her own. She had taken out 2 cups without thinking about it. He pushed the door open and saw the 2 cups already on the counter and looked at them for a long moment and then looked at her, and the expression on his face in that moment was something she intended to carry with her for a very long time. He sat down. She poured. The kitchen settled into the particular quiet of 2 in the morning. The sounds of the building reduced to almost nothing. The grounds outside the window invisible in the dark. They sat with the warmth of the kitchen and their cups, and the comfortable absence of anything they needed to perform. She thought about the birthday, and the bar, and the blue outfit her mother had sent with a note that said you deserve to go somewhere that requires this. She thought about the word, agreed, falling into the air of the crown and claw, and what it had done to everything afterward. She thought about the 30 days and the kitchen the first time, and the garden and the bench, and the morning she had walked back in with her grandmother's recipe box in her bag and her terms ready. She thought about all the ways this had not been the plan, and all the ways it was now the only plan she could imagine having. The cup was warm in her hands. Outside, the northern sky was doing what it did at this hour, holding the dark before it slowly gave it up to the light. He was looking at her. She looked back. No words for this, none needed. The kitchen was warm. The cup was warm. And she was exactly who she had always been, which was the most important thing, sitting in a place she had not expected to love, beside a person she had not planned to find, building something that was going to last. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.